the Jamaica society don't like because we say we want to go back to Africa. You know what I mean? So if we want to go back to Africa, they won't treat us good because they know that we still won't go.
In October 1975, the Wailers returned to play a benefit concert at the National Arena in Kingston, the proceeds from which were to be donated to the Salvation Army School for the Blind. Although the show took place in front of predominantly well-to-do Jamaicans, it was nevertheless hailed as one of the greatest large-scale concerts to be held on the island. Third World opened proceedings before the Wailers took the stage and proceeded to stir it up with a magnificent set. Peter Tosh, temporarily back in the fold, stole the limelight with his Legalise It anthem and a version of Bunny's Battering Down Sentence, a savage indictment of his 60s prison stretch. Stevie Wonder and his Wonderlove band topped the bill, igniting the audience with numbers like Boogie On Reggae Woman, before calling the Wailers back on stage for a jam, everything reaching a riotous finale with an extended I Shot the Sheriff. It was a sign that Marley was now being accepted as an equal by an American black music establishment. In the mid-70s, the singer bought the Old Island Records house at 56 Hope Road in Kingston and set up home there to accommodate his expanding family, friends and business. Bob once commented that he wanted to have as many children as there were shells on the beach. Aside from her duties as an I3, Rita had put her solo career on hold to bring up their kids and turned a blind eye to her partner's womanising. His affair, for example, with Miss World and former Miss Jamaica Cindy Breakspear lasted a long time and even made international headlines. Bianca Jagger was another fan. Bob wasn't just a hit with the ladies. Although he had no time for conventional politics, his increasing militant stance was swiftly gaining ground with the dispossessed youth of Kingston. Marley wasn't interested in aligning himself with either of the two main political parties, the JLP, Jamaican Labour Party, or the PNP, the People's National Party led by Edward Seaga and Michael Manley respectively. However, his sympathies lay more towards the JLP as it wanted to foster relations with Cuba rather than USA. More importantly, the JLP had an important clause in its election manifesto, the legalisation of marijuana. As the national election of 1976 loomed large, Marley and the Wailers released a new album, Rastaman Vibration. Musically, it was their most American radio-friendly release yet. The single from it, Roots Rock Reggae, entering the US top 10. Lyrically, it had much to say, and was the most obvious declaration of his Rastafarian beliefs thus far. War, for example, was based on one of Haile Selassie's most rousing speeches, which the African leader had given in California in 1968. Alan Cole suggested Bob set some of the words to music. It was one of the most compelling moments on the album. On the other hand, Johnny Was addressed the escalating gun violence shaking the ghetto and one individual in particular, Carlton Wilson, who saw himself as a good Samaritan trying to defuse situations between rival gangs by disarming them at gunpoint. The song, for better or worse, saw Marley choosing sides. In the summer of 1976, the band released an uplifting single, Smile Jamaica, and agreed to perform a concert for the Ministry of Culture under the same banner on 5th of December. That autumn, tensions between the gangs and between the political parties reached boiling point. There were ominous signs, one of them being Bob dreaming of gunfire in the night. In the wake of a racing track scam gone wrong, gangsters began to loiter at his Hope Road home. On the evening of 3rd of December, gunshots rang out at the house, its occupants under siege. Wailers manager Don Taylor caught most of the bullets intended for Bob, though both he and Rita were wounded. Miraculously, nobody was killed, but in the ensuing paranoia, it looked certain the Wailers would pull out of the concert. On the morning of the show, fellow performer Roberta Flack had to talk Bob into appearing. The band, meanwhile, monitored events at the concert site, amazed by the 50,000 who turned out. At the 11th hour, Bob relented and went on stage to perform an emotional 90-minute set. Rita, who had not long undergone surgery, appeared in a nightgown, her partner acting out a stunning piece of mime of the assassination attempt. The show was a total triumph. In its wake, Bob disappeared, surfacing in Florida where Siddy now lived, and finally coming to rest in London. It would be 18 months before he'd return home.
Why these people who want to do so much good for everyone, who call themselves governments and this and that, why them say you must not use the herb? You see, we just see them just say, no, you mustn't use it because it make you rebel. Against what?
Marley's arrival in London in early 1977 could not have been better timed. There had been a sea change in popular music during the previous year, with a whole new generation of bands sweeping away the dinosaur progressive rock culture in favour of short, sharp, three-chord punk songs pioneered by the likes of the Sex Pistols and the Damned. In punk clubs like the Roxy, the DJs turned the spiky-haired punks onto reggae, whilst Pistols' main man, Johnny Rotten, played a stunning array of reggae tunes on the BBC. The Clash went one better by recording Junior Mervin's Police and Thieves. This new scene wasn't lost on Bob or old sparring partner Lee Perry, who'd produced the original Mervyn song and had now joined Bob in London. Marley saw the White Punks as very much soul brothers to the Rastas, and a mutual support system existed between the two tribes, leading to two of the biggest political movements in Britain of the 70s, the Anti-Nazi League and Rock Against Racism. Bob even recorded a great single with upcoming British band Aswad, which celebrated this unlikely alliance, Punky Reggae Party. And when he got busted for possession that spring, he joked that, had he been wearing bondage strides, the multi-zip pocketed trousers popular with punks, the police would never have found his stash. However, the most important item on Bob's agenda during the first few months of his exile in London was to record a new album. Energised rather than demoralised by the shooting, Bob was entering a prolific phase in his songwriting, and these new compositions found their way onto Exodus. Many of the songs on the new record were directly inspired by the assassination attempt. Bob was on a creative high, and the electrifying and far-reaching results consolidated his burgeoning international status. One Love, which segued into the old impressions Call to Arms, People Get Ready, closed the album in fine style. It would stay in the UK charts for over 56 weeks, whilst 3 singles taken from it, Waiting in Vain, Jamming and Exodus, all enjoyed big sales. The band toured to promote the new release. Singer Judy Mowat citing the shows as powerful and spiritual. There was a power that pulled you there. Whilst in London, Bob was granted an audience with Crown Prince Asfawassen, son of the late Haile Selassie. The two talked about the prince's father and about what might happen in Ethiopia now that a pro-Marxist government had been elected. At the end of the 2-hour meeting, Wassen produced a ring with a black stone set in it that had been his father's and slipped it onto the singer's finger. Marley was awestruck. The strange dream he'd had years before in Delaware had become reality, its riddle finally solved. If this fulfilled a prophecy, then an incident that occurred in a football match on the Euro leg of the tour seemed to bode ill for the future. A severe tackle tore Bob's right big toenail off, the same toe that had been hurt in another game in Kingston 2 years previously. The injury didn't heal well, and its condition worsened to such an extent that surgery to remove it was recommended. However, Bob's Rasta beliefs forbade amputation, so a doctor performed a skin graft, which appeared to temporarily cure the problem. Marley returned to Jamaica in February 1978. There was a further world tour planned to promote yet another new album. The latest offering from the man who was now being called the King of International Reggae was a set of surprisingly mellow love songs. The title of the new LP, Kaya, referred to a kind of marijuana, but the overall message, Bob asserted, was about togetherness, humanity and peace. Even though it contained some songs he'd recorded with Scratch back in 1970, the new versions of which disappointed old fans, the record was another international smash and spawned 2 more hit singles, Satisfy My Soul and Is This Love? Coinciding with its release, Marley and the Wailers played the One Love Peace Concert on the 22nd of April 1978. The positive vibrations from the new album were obviously still strong. Topping a bill that featured the creme de la creme of reggae's brightest stars, the Wailers' set surpassed even their own staggeringly high standards. As their performance reached its climax, Bob coerced both Michael Manley and Edward Seaga onto the stage, grabbed the politician's hands, and forged an unlikely handshake. It might ultimately have been an empty gesture, but the powerful image of Marley uniting two warring factions was a stunning achievement that few rock stars have ever achieved before or since.
I don't feel Jamaica going to be the right place for me because Jamaica a little bit small. Somewhere new, Ethiopia, adventure, you know what I mean? You can start live. The only place we can do that is Africa, big enough.
After the peace concert, Bob and the band set off on their most extensive tour so far, visiting Australia and New Zealand, Japan, Canada and the USA. In New York, he was presented with the United Nations Medal of Peace. It proved Marley was no longer just a rock star, but a symbol of hope for millions. In Africa, he was being hailed as a saviour, so it was a pinnacle moment in his life when he set foot on the continent for the first time at the end of 1978, visiting Kenya and then his spiritual homeland of Ethiopia. But the reality of life there was quite different to how he had imagined it. It was the Rasta dream that they should eventually return to the country of their origin, the biblical Promised Land. Here, however, was a country torn apart by war, where its former leader, the man he worshipped as a deity, Haile Selassie, had died in shame and been laid in the earth without so much as a marker. Yet even these sobering facts failed to shake his religious beliefs. The music business machine whirred so fast and furious behind him that there was no time for Marley to navel-gaze. Ireland released a double live album, Babylon by Bus, culled from shows at the Pavilion in Paris the previous year. In all but name, it was a greatest hits package, revealing Bob and the Wailers at the absolute peak of their performing powers. Bob and Rita had written a song back in 1975 called Children of the Ghetto. 4 years later, the number now retitled Children Playing in the Street was recorded by the Melody Makers, a group put together by 4 of their children. Released through the Tough Gong label, all monies were donated to the UN Children's Fund as 1979 was International Year of the Child. On the live front, the undoubted highlight of the year was the Wailers' appearance at Reggae Sunsplash 2 in Montego Bay. Due to heavy touring commitments, they'd had to miss the inaugural edition, even though the inspiration for it had come in part from Bob and family man Barrett. By the time the group made its entrance, the heavens had opened and there was mud all over the stage. It didn't deter the Wailers one bit, with Junior Marvin slipping and sliding around the stage as if it was part of the act. It was an important show for the Wailers, their first in Jamaica since the One Love Peace Concert, and they wowed a huge audience made up not only of Jamaicans, but also Europeans and Americans too. The festival was deemed such a success that it became an annual fixture. During the concert, Bob unveiled new songs like Ambush in the Night, which harkened back to the attempt on his life 3 years before. The response from the crowd was so overwhelming, they obviously identified closely with what had happened. Ambush was one of the choice cuts on the Wailers' new album, Survival. Originally titled Black Survival to highlight the importance of African unity, but abbreviated for maximum effect, Survival was actually the first of an intended trilogy, which would include 1980's Uprising and 1981's Confrontation. It proved that despite millions of record sales and media hype, Marley had lost none of his revolutionary fervour and was committed more than ever to the plight of the Third World. He remained true to his roots. On this album, the battle lines between his own people and the exploitative corporate world, Babylon, were drawn. The man appeared to be unstoppable.
But the main places where the people hear the music is from the sound system there, all over, you know. Because when the sound system plays, you can stay even a mile and hear it playing, or even more than that.
The Survival album followed its predecessors to the top of the charts around the world and not surprisingly became very popular in Africa. One of its most militant songs was Zimbabwe, written about the former Rhodesia, which became an anthem for black African solidarity. It was therefore no surprise that when Home Rule was passed from a white to a black government there, that the most appropriate band to help celebrate its independence should be Bob Marley and the Wailers. It was to prove a bittersweet experience. The Independence Day ceremony took place on the 18th of April 1980 in the Rafaro Stadium in Salisbury, the country's capital. The group played to a packed house of 40,000, which included new President Robert Mugabe and Prince Charles representing the UK. Unfortunately, many more thousands of ordinary people, all hoping to hear the now legendary singer, had been locked out of the venue, and 20 minutes into the set, as the band started I Shot the Sheriff, the riot police opened fire and started spraying the crowds outside with tear gas. The wind suddenly changed and the gas blew back onto the performers, who were forced to leave the stage. Meditating on the situation backstage, Marley must have realised that despite his beliefs and his achievements so far, there were no easy answers to the problems his songs addressed. Given the all clear, he returned to the stage and brought the house down with an emotional Zimbabwe. The next day, he and the band played a further show in front of over 100,000 liberated Zimbabweans. He now had success, but at what price? Physically, he had aged dramatically. His injured toe had never healed, and its condition worsened. His popularity had brought his message to the hearts of millions, but back home in Jamaica, he had enemies, not only within the government, but also in Rasta circles. It was even alleged that he was being targeted by the American counterintelligence agency, the CIA, which had a special interest in the Caribbean. And there were more records to make and tours to do. The pressure never stopped. Bob approached his life and music with a missionary zeal that would have burnt out lesser artists, and the quality of their output would have diminished accordingly. This was never the case with Marley. Uprising, released in May 1980, showed that his creative muse was still burning bright, even though he was averaging only 3 hours of sleep per night. The first single off this latest work, the wildly infectious Could You Be Loved, was another worldwide hit, whilst Bad Card referred to the breakdown in trust between the Wailers and their longtime manager Don Taylor. However, the standout cut on this album was Redemption Song, which featured Bob just singing and strumming his acoustic guitar. Lacking the usual reggae beat, this was a powerfully melodic and spiritual piece that echoed the finest work of that other Bob, Bob Dylan. Marley was a big devotee of the American singer. The number had been one of the last to be recorded for Uprising. On first hearing the tapes for it, Chris Blackwell had stated that he thought there was something missing. The album sounded incomplete. Marley said nothing, but returned to the studio the next day with 2 new songs, Coming In From the Cold and Redemption Song, which bookended the LP respectively. Barely pausing to draw breath, the Wailers then went out on tour to promote this new magnum opus, performing a memorable set at the Crystal Palace Bowl in London and one in front of enthusiastic fans in Milan. The group was then scheduled to play America, with a series of shows that were intended to establish them over there once and for all. Tragically, it was to prove a bridge too far.
Because in everything you're going to do, there's a wrong way and a right way. And if you listen good, you will know the right way, you know? Because there is a voice inside talking to everyone.
The Wailers were due to open their autumn US tour by playing 2 shows with the Commodores at the massive Madison Square Gardens in New York on the 19th and 20th of September. On the second night, things started to go wrong. Bob almost passed out during the Wailers' set and barely made it through to the end of the performance. On Sunday morning, he awoke feeling strange and fuzzy and barely remembered the problems of the previous evening. Later, he and Skilly left the Essex House Hotel where they were staying and went out jogging in Central Park. During the run, Bob collapsed. Skilly somehow managed to get him back to the hotel, and it was suspected he'd had a stroke. Still groggy but sufficiently recovered, the singer agreed to travel to Pittsburgh to do the Tuesday night show on the 23rd of September. It turned out to be his final appearance before the public. There was an especially moving rendition of Redemption Song, but as Rita later bemoaned, there was a feeling of a whole era coming to a climax. Everybody around him sensed that something catastrophic was going to happen. The tour was cancelled, and under a total press blackout, Marley entered the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in Manhattan and was given intensive chemotherapy that made his infamous dreadlocks fall out. The prognosis wasn't good. The cancer, which had started in his injured toe, had spread right through his body, and he had a brain tumour. His condition was terminal. He left New York for consultations at the Cedars of Lebanon Hospital in Miami and another in Mexico where fellow cancer patient, actor Steve McQueen, had been treated. But doctors all had the same bad news to tell him. He would be lucky if he lived out the year. Dr. Carl Fraser, a Jamaican medic popular with the Rastas, made a last-ditch suggestion. There was a controversial physician, Dr. Joseph Issels, who had made a name for himself treating hopeless cancer cases. Issels admitted Marley into his Ringberg clinic in the small town of Rottach-Egern in southern Germany, close to the Austrian border. Bob responded to the German doctor's methods of treatment, which included a strict diet, not unlike the one the Rastas followed, exercise and elements of both psychology and holistic medicine. Issels also injected him with various vaccines which the medical profession frowned upon. When some of the Wailers, Tyrone Downey, Seco Patterson and Junior Marvin, visited him on his 36th birthday in February 1981, he seemed in reasonable shape, and his self-confidence received a further boost in April when he was awarded the Jamaican Order of Merit. But finally there came a point where Dr. Issels could do no more. In early May, Bob left the Tyrol to return to his Caribbean home.
My life is only important if me can help plenty people. If my life is just me, my own security, then I don't want it. My life is for people.
Marley arrived in Miami and started to put his affairs in order. Sadly, he would never see Jamaica again. He made his peace with his mother and family and died on the morning of the 11th of May, 1981. The world had lost not just one of its best-loved pop stars, but also a man of great spirit and vision, a natural mystic as Bob himself might have put it. Jamaica mourned his death. His official funeral took place on Thursday the 21st of May. He lay in state in a glass-fronted coffin in the National Heroes Arena. He had been carefully embalmed in Florida, and Rita had woven his dreadlocks, which had fallen out in New York after the radiation treatment, into a wig which covered his head. Constantly harassed by the police who tried to keep them in line, thousands upon thousands of islanders queued up to catch a last glimpse of the man who'd given them hope, whilst Bob's music played continuously over the PA system. There had been a private funeral for family and close friends at the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Bob had followed Rita's example and been baptised as a Christian Rasta the previous November. At the state funeral, the service was conducted in African and English. Both Michael Manley and the Governor-General read from the Bible, whilst Prime Minister Edward Seaga spoke a eulogy for the deceased reggae singer. Afterwards, Bob's life was celebrated in a manner he would have approved of, with music. The Wailers played a set with Junior Marvin ably deputising for his departed brother. Bob's mother Siddy sang Coming In From the Cold, and the I-Threes delivered a very moving version of Rastaman Chant. Bob would have been especially proud of his eldest son Ziggy, leading the Melody Makers through a selection of songs. When the music was over, the funeral cortege took his body back to the place of his birth, 9 miles. As the procession reached its final destination, the roads and hillsides of St Anne's were thronged with crowds of Rastas out to pay their respects to Marley one last time. Ironically, neither Bunny nor Peter put in an appearance to say goodbye to their old soul brother. Marley's coffin was laid to rest in a specially prepared Egyptian-like tomb in a spot not far from where both he and his mother had been born. It was the end of an era. Bob Marley was a hard act to follow, and reggae was never quite the musical force again that it had been during his lifetime. Lee Perry was one individual who saw and acknowledged this, destroying and flooding his Black Ark studios. However, as much as it was the end of Marley's natural life, it was only the beginning of a legend which has continued to grow. Soon after his death, the final part of the planned album trilogy was completed by the release of Confrontation. Like its predecessors, it was stamped with Marley's genius and contained songs which would have undoubtedly become part of the inner canon of his best work had he lived. This final studio outing was tinged with a serenity and honesty that suggested the singer was coming to terms with his own mortality, as songs like I Know revealed. Buffalo Soldier, inspired by the troops of black soldiers who fought for the US Army against the Native Americans in the late 19th century, was a real standout. Confrontation was followed by what many had been waiting years for, a greatest hits collection. Legend spent 64 weeks on the American album chart and contained many of his timeless classics, such as No Woman No Cry. It would go on to shift in excess of 19 million units. Bob had quietly seen to it that his incredible wealth, something he had hardly bothered about during his own lifetime, was fairly distributed amongst his offspring, of which there were 16 at the last count. Many of them, such as Richie and Julian, followed in their father's footsteps and chose a musical career. Ziggy is perhaps the best known of his progeny, but sadly suffers in a similar way to that son of another famous rock icon, Julian Lennon. He has a voice eerily similar to Bob's, but unfortunately has yet to show the vision, drive or charisma that set Robert Nesta Marley apart from his contemporaries. Successive waves of music lovers regard Marley as one of the true greats of 20th century music, many of whom never witnessed him firsthand. He continues to receive honours, and in 2001, for example, was given a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. He was Jamaica's first true superstar, but he was more than just an entertainer. Figures like Marley only come along once in a lifetime. He was a one-off, a true leader of men, and one can only ponder what further greatness he might have achieved had he lived.
Thank you for buying Maximum Bob Marley. We hope you enjoyed it. Watch out for further titles and Chrome Dreams coming up soon. If you did enjoy it or have any comments or suggestions, write to us at Chrome Dreams, PO Box 230, New Malden, Surrey, UK KT3 6YY, or email on mail@chromedreams.co.uk. Details of our full catalogue are listed on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk. Thanks again for listening and goodbye for now.